Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me all right like this? Should I come closer to the microphone, or this is okay? Is this good? Okay. I was honored to be here last year and talking about the situation and the way people were mobilizing both in Spain and Syria, which are the countries I am from. I'm both Spanish and Syrian. And I was experiencing movements, citizen movements, both in Spain and in Syria at the same time last year. So it was quite an experience to be sharing both sides here in Ars Electronica. This year, I was happy to be part of the jury, a member of the jury for the Ars Electronica Awards, the Digital Communities category. And I'm really happy to be listening to our colleagues in a few minutes and throughout the morning and listen to their experiences. I think this year we awarded, above all, the power of freedom and the power of people to build their own tools, to build their own languages, to build their own answers and against or within more or less repressive systems. So this is where you can you hear me okay like this? Is this okay? So this is where you can find me. I'm Leila Nachawati Rego, leilanachawati.com. I'm writing for Global Voices. And this is my email if you want to contact me. And this is my Twitter handle, Leila_NA. I would like to share just one example of very different contexts where freedom of expression is can't ever be given for granted. So I would like to see how, and I would like to share one example of how communities and people working in using digital tools to build communities around their projects can create alternatives to these repressive contexts and structures, we could say. So I would like to see an example of Bahrain, an example of Palestine, Syria, Saudi Arabia, and China as very different cases where freedom of expression is under threat. So we've experienced over the last year and a half how citizens woke up and how mobilizations all over the world had a lot to do with the fact that people had a voice. People wanted to have a voice and wanted to share their demands and concerns against regimes, against systems that they did not feel represented by. 5 examples of citizen communities against oppression. So Bahrain. Bahrain, if we go to mainstream media and if we go to the international agenda, is, we could say, the forgotten revolution. Is the forgotten revolution, and we see how the Formula One race takes place in one of the most repressive countries in the world, with a repressive regime that silences its own citizens, that represses the majority of the population, that's controlled by a minority. So we see how the Formula One contest and other international celebrations take place in Bahrain while the regime silences citizens. So this is Bahrain while the Formula One was taking place and the authorities were arresting a group of 5 female activists while the Formula One was taking place. In the middle of the fuzz, you can see them here. These are well-known freedom of speech activists with all the international delegations around. So it's the forgotten revolution, but not for MENA citizens, because Middle East and North Africa citizens have grown this awareness and these links and these bonds that have a lot to do with the power of community, with the power of people connecting with each other, connecting with each other's problems and challenges. And since MENA citizens have very similar challenges, they have been very aware of the situation in Bahrain more than mainstream media from the rest of the world. So this is a Hawaya activist, an activist called Hawaya, and the whole Hawaya family is a symbol of standing for freedom of expression in a country where freedom of expression is repressed on a daily basis. So he's on a hunger strike, and this is the video that his daughter dedicated to him and that has gone viral and shared by hundreds and thousands through the internet. Do we have sound?
Why do you strike? You should be happy that your conditions have improved. At least you're not in solitary confinement anymore. At least the torture has stopped. My father smiled with his kind eyes and looked up at his jailer. He then told the officer this story. You know, as a child I learned of two kinds of birds that are oh so very different. The first is the nightingale. Put a nightingale in a cage and feed it, and what beautiful songs it will sing for you. Open the cage, let the bird out, and it will go right back when it's hungry. The officer stared at the prisoner, listening intently to his story. My father's eyes lit up and he continued. But then, there is the wild bird. Put it in a golden cage, provide it with the best food, and you will hear no song. Come back in a few days, and you'll find the bird at the bottom of the cage, dead. For this bird you might cry. You might say, a golden cage and all this food, how could it die? But what you don't understand is the wild bird can never live in your cage. Never, golden or otherwise. My father continues his hunger strike to this day for all our freedom.
Palestine. So Palestine has allowed citizens who are deprived of their physical spaces to maintain their identity through digital spaces in a way that has challenged the occupation in a way that they didn't expect. So something that was not expected from the Palestinian people is that generation after generation they would keep calling themselves Palestinian. So they still consider themselves Palestinians even if they're born third generation in another country. So being able to use digital tools to connect with each other, to maintain their identity, to create projects where this identity is portrayed, has turned out to be extremely helpful. And there are a lot of projects that depend on communities of Palestinian people putting names on the map, like this one. This is Grassroots Al-Quds Network. So it's a community that's based on putting back on the map the names of old Palestinian villages, neighborhoods, cities that now have the new Israeli names, and we're losing all this historic memory. So Palestinians are trying to, we could say, put these names back on the map. There's another project that I wanted to show you that's kind of new, that's called Visualizing Palestine, and that's also depending on community to create maps. These are maps that reflect the policy of displacement, so the amount of Palestinian houses demolished every day and the amount of people that are homeless every day. So they create maps to reflect how the situation is evolving on the ground. There's this other map that shows segregated roads. So there are buses that only Israelis can ride, where only Israelis are allowed. So buses for Israeli people only. So this allows you to map these kind of buses. Where do they go through? What are the roads where Palestinians are allowed? Which are the roads where only Israeli people are allowed? So you can map this with your phone. You can send this information through your phone, and it automatically goes on these maps. project that shows hunger strikers and the effects on their body, sensation of cold. We're not in search of death, we're looking for real life. Okay. This shows the waters of Gaza and the amount of pollution on each of them. So I really recommend you to take a look at this, visualizing Palestine. Syria. Kafar Nubel. So this is a small town in Syria where people have been very effectively sharing messages from a very difficult situation. They keep being bombarded, shot, tortured, harassed by the Syrian regime. And they keep doing these manual posters that they photograph and they share they put it on the internet and then people share it. And it has become like a ritual for us activists and the ones who live abroad to go to the Kafar Nubel site and see what are the new images every week and share them. And these images go extremely viral on Facebook, on Twitter. I mean, they have millions of visits and they become a symbol of resistance through very elementary art, elementary production without tools. So combining offline, old school painting, hand painting, with the power of digital tools to make this huge. So this is one of their posters, one of their pictures. So this is the UN photographing a Syrian child just being bombarded, and they're saying, "Say cheese." So every week they have one or two of these photos that they share and they become viral and that we all use as our profile pictures, for our Facebook sites, for our blogs. So it's like a language of its own, the language of rebellion, the language of resistance, the voice of the people without intermediaries that we can actually gather and spread. And this is another proof of creativity of people through offline tools and how it goes viral with online tools and communities spreading it. This poster says this is the flag of Syria, of the Syrian regime as activists see it. And it says corruption, despotism, demolition, and see what they do in the middle of the video. See how it changes. Towards a modern society that is more developed and sensible. Okay. Saudi Arabia. So Saudi Arabia is also, it's maybe the revolution that will be, the revolution that we hope we'll see in the coming future. So it's the only country in the world where women cannot drive. This is just one thing they can do, but they actually lack every right, to do anything without their husband's signatures. So not being able to drive is a very symbolic thing that people are trying to struggle against as maybe the beginning of a change. So there's this fatwa, this religious imposition that prevents women from driving, and they're put to jail or at least questioned and interrogated if they see a woman driving in the streets. So there's this initiative that started a few years ago and became really strong last year, where a woman was driving. She has a license from another country, otherwise imagine driving without a license would be dangerous. So she recorded herself driving and uploaded it to YouTube, questioning the fatwa, questioning the prohibition. So they arrested her. And a few days later, the campaign for her liberation, both inside Saudi Arabia and internationally, was so huge that they released her. And 100 other women have tried to drive in Saudi Arabia ever since. And we might be near, we hope, the beginning of a change in Saudi Arabia. Women to Drive is the tag on Twitter if you want to see this.
تطوع ببلاش، احنا قلنا لهم ترى شوفوا راح ندفع لكم شيء.
هذه
حمله تطوعيه انه نساعد بنات البلد. الأمية والجهل عندنا في السواقات، تلاقي واحدة معاها PhD بروفيسورة في الجامعة وما تعرف تسوق. نبي نلغي الأمية هذه في البلد. على الأقل إنه الوحدة في أوقات لا قدر الله اللي هو الطوارئ إنها تقدر تمشي أمورها، يعني لا قدر الله زوجها كان معاها جات له سكتة ولا جات شيء يسم الله عليه.
يعني على فكرة اليوم في جريدة الرياض ذكروا انه في اخت انقذت اخوها
اليوم
واخذته على المستشفى بسيارتها. فهي طبعا المرأة مش فقط
قريتها في تويت
مش للطوارئ، المرأة مثل الرجل في انها تعيش حياتها الاجتماعية
بكرامة
بكرامة من غير ما تذل نفس لأي أحد.
يعني مو كلنا عايشين ملكات ومدللات ومرفهات وعندنا سواقين، مو كلنا. يعني أنا مستحيل، يعني حتى لو إني أقدر أجيب سواق مستحيل أخلي إنسان غريب يعيش في بيتي. يعني هذه أمر منتهي منها.
لا.
So I encourage you to continue viewing this. She's Manal Al-Sharif, and you can find this video everywhere. I mean, it's huge at this point. And I wanted to finish by mentioning the example of China, and one of the awards, the Electronica Awards for the Digital Communities category was given to this Chinese project, this Chinese community around a blind lawyer, Cheng Guancheng, who was arrested for defending civil rights and causes and justice against the government's will. So he was arrested, and this took Chinese people to the street wearing sunglasses and recording themselves in solidarity with this figure. And this is something, from what I've heard from my Chinese friends, is something very strong in China, where freedom of expression not only does not exist, but it's not a concern for many Chinese people. This friend literally said, Chinese human rights seem to be an issue for everyone except for Chinese people. This is what our friend says. So there seems to be a lack of awareness that they actually lack freedom of expression and what comes with it. So this might be the beginning of something that helps tear down this wall of silence that isolates Chinese citizens from the rest of the world. So this is what I have presented is just a small example of what we have achieved thanks to the new tools that we have at our disposals and that allow us to have a voice. And we're going to have a discussion on these issues with our colleagues from the projects and the golden and the awards winners. But I would like to throw the question here before I throw it at them. How dependent are these projects? How dependent is freedom? How dependent is freedom of expression, freedom for citizens on net freedom, on internet freedom? Well, it depends on how much we consider it something to keep, something to save. And actually, threats to the internet freedom are not restricted to repressive contexts, as we may all know. It's something that is under threat, a constant threat all over the world, and actually needs for us to be really aware of how important these tools are for empowerment in order to be able to protect them from laws that might attack the freedom that we might achieve through these new tools. So I wanted to finish with the same sentence. I have a voice, we have a voice. I'm happy to hear yours, and I'll be around.